بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الهداة المهديين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We mentioned last night that the Holy Quran tells us that one of the main benefits of fasting is to achieve taqwa. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And then we ask this question, what is taqwa? What is the concept of taqwa? Such that the Quran says in another verse, إِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. The best zad, the best supplement for you to take to the next life is taqwa. And we mentioned that taqwa is basically protecting yourself from the dangers, the spiritual dangers of the dunya. Protecting yourself from haram. And then we gave an analogy. We said if one wants to understand how to protect themselves from sins, how to protect yourselves from vices, spiritual viruses, look no further than physical viruses. The same way that we use and employ to protect ourselves from physical viruses, we use that same way to protect ourselves from spiritual viruses. And then I gave you examples. I mentioned that there are two types of ways that we all learned this throughout the past couple of years, throughout the pandemic. There are two main ways that we can protect ourselves from any virus, especially if it's a respiratory virus. The first one relies on external methods. And we said one example is social distancing. So you keep your distance from the virus itself. And then we gave the example of social distancing when it comes to spiritual viruses. And spiritual viruses, we said, are what? Sins. They are sins and they are the vices of the nafs, meaning the negative qualities that the human being may possess, like arrogance and stinginess and greed and so on and so forth. So in the same way that we practiced social distancing in order to stay away from physical viruses, the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, they teach us the same concept of social distancing, but to protect yourself from spiritual viruses. And I gave you a couple of examples. I gave you the example of staying away from friends that may have a negative impact on you. Many ahadith from Ahlul Bayt. That if you find someone, a friend or a group of friends that may negatively affect you, that may themselves have many negative traits and they sin all the time, stay away from them. Why? Social distancing. Don't go close to the haram. Because if you go close to the haram, many times you will be infected. The other example we gave, Allah says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't even go close to zina. Why? Because if you go close, then you will be infected. And I gave other examples that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. So that's one example that we spoke about last night, social distancing. Another external method that we use to protect ourselves from viruses was the masks that we wore. The masks that we wore during the pandemic became an intrinsic part of our life. It became a part of our every single day life. Why? Because the mask, it was believed in the beginning. Why do we wear the mask? It protects you from the virus. Because how do you usually get infected? You breathe the virus either through your mouth or your nose. So wear the mask so that if the virus is somewhere in the air or someone is infected, then this mask will protect you. But then it was discovered that this mask doesn't really protect you much. The surgical mask. Maybe, yes, the N95 that probably no one besides a doctor would wear, and you could even hardly breathe wearing it. The normal surgical, those blue masks, they don't really protect you too much, especially with the more contagious variants of COVID. So many people started to say, then why should I wear a mask? It's a waste of time. Whether I wear a mask, I don't wear a mask, I'm still going to get infected. But then came out this new idea that, okay, it may not be very well in protecting you, but it does well in protecting others. If you are sick, how do you transmit this virus? By talking, by breathing, by coughing, by sneezing. So this mask, even if it's a surgical mask, it will at least block 90 to 95% of the virus, so other people will be safe. Other people will be safe when you wear a mask. So if someone comes out and says, you know, I don't want to wear a mask because I don't believe in it, or because I don't think it really protects me, this honestly is a selfish way of thinking. Okay, it may not protect you, but at least it protects others. So this was the point of wearing that mask. Once again, a barrier between you and the virus, or a barrier between the virus infecting other people. So that's why I said it's an exterior protection from the virus. Now, let's take the same example and apply it to spiritual viruses. The traditions of Ahlul Bayt tell us that every single believer must also wear a spiritual mask on their mouths. And this might be something that we feel it is strange, it is new, but once we understand how and what exactly is your spiritual mask for your mouth, you will all realize that this is common sense. And this is something preached by all religions. And not just religions, even individuals that may not even be religious, but they realize the importance of wearing a spiritual mask on their mouth. Now, why do we have to wear a spiritual mask on our mouth? The reason is, brothers and sisters, many times we human beings spread spiritual viruses through this tongue. And that's why we need to wear a mask. That's why we need to conceal it. The hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, إِنَّ أَكْثَرَ خَطَايَا بْنِ آدَمٍ مِنْ لِسَانِهِ. He says most of the sins of human beings is because of this tongue. It's a very small organ. The tongue, compared to many of your organs in your body, is small in size. But the damage that it can cause towards other individuals sometimes is unedible. Sometimes it is beyond perception. You know how many types of sins we can commit through this tongue? There's a scholar, one of our ulama, Shahid Dastaghaib, he has a book called Al-Dhunub Al-Kabira. He lists the different types of sins based on your body part. Like the sins of the tongue, the sins of the ear, the sins of the eye, and so on and so forth. The sins of the tongue is the longest chapter. It has the most types. Almost 20 types of sins that you can commit with the small tongue. Like with the small tongue. For example, lying. Al-Kadhib. You have backbiting, ghiba. Backbiting, whether you are the person committing the backbiting or listening to the backbiting. This is a sin. You have an-namima, which is basically creating a fitna. When you hear someone backbiting, you go and tell the person, that individual is backbiting against you. This is also haram. You have, for example, al-fuhsh, swearing. You have insulting other individuals and mocking them, slandering, causing fitna in the community. And the list goes on and on and on. We can commit so many sins with the small tongue. And by committing these sins, we are practically spreading the virus. But what type of virus? We are spreading the spiritual virus that can cause much more damage than any other physical virus that you can imagine. And because this tongue is so dangerous, and many times we will commit these sins of the tongue without even realizing it, we have to learn to control the tongue, brothers and sisters. We have to learn to control the tongue. You know, they say, there's a famous saying that says, this tongue is a terrible master. It's a terrible master if you let it lead you, if you let it control you. but it's a great servant. But if you control it, then it becomes a method and a way for you to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can spread so much good in the world through your tongue if you can just control it and channel it in the right way. So it's a very good servant, but it's a terrible master. And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is narrated saying the same thing in Nahjul Balagha. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, لسان العاقل وراء قلبه ولسان الأحمق وراء وقلب الأحمق وراء لسانه. He says there is a unique difference between the wise individual, the aqil, and the fool, the ahmaq. What's the difference? He says the wise individual, he thinks and then he speaks. So it's his mind, qalb here means mind. Then it's his tongue. His tongue is behind his mind. So he thinks and then he speaks. While the fool, the ahmaq, he speaks and then he thinks. And that's why one of the best ways to control, to place a mask, that spiritual mask on this tongue so that it does not spread that virus is what? Is to not to blurt out anything that comes to your mind. You know, some of us, we have this habit. I'm hearing a story, I'm talking to someone, or I'm hearing someone speak. The first idea that comes to my mind, I blurt it out right away. We have this impulsive behavior. After we blurt it out, we think, wait a minute, did I say the right thing? Was this offensive? Did I say something that I was not supposed to say? Many times you say some things and you reveal some information that you should have never revealed. Why did you do that? Because you don't think. Only after you speak you think. And now the problem is, it's not just this tongue. Now it's through what? Typing. Same thing, right? Now we talk through social media more than we actually physically talk through typing. How many times you see people post stupid things on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram or one of these social media platforms? Sometimes they will lose their jobs because of it. I have heard stories of people losing their jobs because of one tweet. Because they said something, they could not control this tongue. They could not control their impulses. They type without thinking, and then next day they are in a big problem. I've heard of stories of people that get into trouble with the law. They will get into legal problems because they say something. They will get into financial problems just because they didn't think, they tweeted something. I remember this was last year. The CEO of the famous company Tesla, Elon Musk. He's the owner and the CEO. This happened last year, it was all over the news, I'm sure you followed. He tweeted something that he was not supposed to tweet, so I don't remember what it was. Because of that tweet, the company, the board, forced him to resign from being the CEO. Just from one tweet, because he couldn't keep his mouth shut, he couldn't stop from tweeting. Whatever comes to his mind, he would tweet it right away, without thinking of the consequences. This is what Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says. So the first way to place a mask on our tongue is to think and then speak. And even though, brothers and sisters, this sounds like it's common sense, but most of us, we don't do this. We speak, then we think. That's why we regret saying many things. We say things that are offensive. Had we thought it through before, we would have never said it. Sometimes we say some harsh words, and that word will cause huge damage. Sometimes we do ghibah. Sometimes we expose other people's secrets, and because of that, a relationship is completely broke. It's broken, it's destroyed. A husband and wife may get divorced because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. So one of the most important things for us to place a mask on this tongue, is to learn to think and then speak. And that's why one of the qualities of the God-conscious scholars that remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that when you ask them a question, no matter what it may be, they will think about it. They will think a couple of times, and then they will answer. Sometimes they think because they're trying to remember. Other times they know the answer, but they will still think because they want to make sure that they word everything in the right way. It's not offensive. It doesn't come back later to haunt me. I'm not saying something that may be problematic in anywhere in my life. This is how any successful, wise individual should live. And one way, brothers and sisters, to think before you speak, and if you have this tendency to always blurt out. I see some people who are sitting in the majlis. So we are few scholars, we're talking, and someone who's a layman, awam as we say, not a scholar. We're speaking about a mas'ala, all of a sudden this person keeps on interrupting. I think this, I think that. Why? Because he has an idea, he has to blurt it. There's no pause button. There's no filtering system. We need to create that pause button. Don't just blurt out anything. Sometimes we make ourselves look like fools, like idiots, because we cannot control our tongue. So one way to fix this problem is to try to find out why you have this urge to blurt out anything that comes to your mind. You know, psychiatrists and psychologists mention this. If you have a tendency that you talk too much, that you blurt out everything, try to do some self-introspection, reflection, to find out why you love speaking without thinking, why you blurt out so much. They say if you really sit down and you do this muhasabat al-nafs, this self-introspection, you will find out that there are some bigger issues that you are dealing with. And this, speaking without thinking, is what? Is a symptom of that bigger problem. For example, they mention anxiety. Some people suffer from anxiety. They're anxious. They may not realize it. And one way that they think helps them in coping with their anxiety is by always talking. They have to always say something. Why? Because that anxiety creates a sense of fear the whole time. A sense that, you know what? I will not be accepted. So they try to create a fake persona to hide behind it. Talk, talk, talk all the time so that you can distract people from your anxiety. So if that's the case, then I have to go and try to treat my anxiety through natural ways, and sometimes maybe you need to go and see a counselor, you need to see a psychiatrist, sometimes even medication will help. Other times you will find that the source of you speaking all the time without thinking is what? Pride, al-ujb, narcissism, al-narjasiyya. Because I love being the center of every majlis. There are some people, right? In every majlis, they have to be the center. They love hearing their voice. I know some people, when you give them this, but you really have to snatch it from their hands. Dua, what a dua, what a dua, what a... Habibi, we told you read 2 minutes dua, 15 minutes. He wants to read Dua Joshan al-Kabir. Why? Because when he or she hears their voice, Allahu Akbar, khalas ba'ad, they become intoxicated. This is what narcissism is. Now you may not know it. You don't realize it. But what's one of the symptoms of narcissism? So when you always talk without thinking. You love being the center of attention. You love everybody looking at you. Everybody saying, wow, mashallah, he speaks nice. He says this and that. So in this situation, how do I put a mask on my mouth? You have to treat your narcissism. And the treatment for narcissism, you'll only find it in the ilm of akhlaq. Ethics. The ulama of ethics, they teach us that this is a sickness, narcissism. It's a marad. And it has a treatment. But obviously, the treatment is not going to a doctor. It's going to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And they tell us how we can get rid of this narcissistic habit that we have. Other times you may find that we have low self-confidence. And that's why we keep on speaking and blurting out. Why? Because we feel that people don't care about us. People don't value us. So maybe if I start talking and saying something funny and trying to say stories, maybe then people will start liking me. Now what's the problem is, many times because of that, you'll commit haram. You'll offend other people. You're trying to be funny. How do you be funny? You pick on someone in the majlis. You make fun of someone, right? Even though your intention is good, you don't really want to upset that person, but many times Brothers and sisters, many times when we joke around with each other, that leaves hard feelings. That leaves a scar in the heart of the other person, even though that person may be smiling because he doesn't want to seem like a crybaby, right? We'll say this person is a nahas, crybaby. We were joking with him. He has no choice. But deep down in his heart, he is hurt. It is not okay to offend someone, wallah, because it's a joke. It is not okay to put someone down because I am trying to be funny. Offending someone is haram, period. I don't care why, what, who, when, where. And unfortunately, this is something I see even some religious people. People who are mu'mins, believers. They make fun of others, but what? They do it in a joking way, thinking that will make it halal. Still haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold me accountable for every word. مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ. Every word that I say, Allah will hold me accountable for it. Every single word. If it hurts somebody's feelings. Now, how will I know if it will hurt that person's feelings? Think. When you think, this is where you can place that pause button. So this is one way that we can control our tongue. Is to what? Think before you speak. Another way, another good mask to place on your tongue is what? Is to learn silence. If I have a tendency to commit sins because of my tongue, because I speak, one solution to sinning less is what? Don't speak. The less you can speak, the better. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says this. He says, كَثْرَةُ الْكَلَامِ. When you speak a lot, whatever it may be, يُورِثُ الْخَطَأ. Number one, it will lead to you committing mistakes and sins. The more you speak, the more the chances of you committing haram mistakes. Why? Because none of us is ma'soom. None of us is infallible. So the more you speak, the chances of you committing a mistake will be higher. يُورِثُ الْخَطَأ الزَّلَلْ وَالْمَلَلْ. What's malal? Boredom. Why? You see some people when they talk, are they bored? They're having so much fun. But who's bored? The receiving end, the other person. They just have to hear this person talk. And they try to be polite and respectful, but this is torture for that person. Torture. I've seen that in some majalis. You see some guy just sitting 15 minutes, the other person is just talking. And this is also narcissism. I'm the center of the world. As long as I'm feeling good, venting, it's something we love doing, venting. But what about the other person? Yurithul malal. This person will be bored and that person will eventually hate me, run away from me. I know some people, they talk too much. When others see them come in a majlis or anywhere, they run away. Because they don't want to be rude and tell that person, you talk too much. So what do? They try to stay away from that person. And amongst the individuals, and I say this with, with complete humility, that really suffer from this problem is scholars. Why? Because you see people always come to scholars and they have questions. No problem, go to a scholar and ask him a question. But many times I realize, either with me or I see other scholars, it's not really someone who wants to come and ask you a question and seeks guidance. It's just venting. It's just venting. They just want to get this off their chest. They see the Sayyid, the Sheikh, they think this person has nothing to do. Yallah, 30 minutes, let me just go and whine and complain. There are some people that have a question. They come, they tell me, Sayyid, the other day I woke up in the morning, I had breakfast, and then I went to work, and then I came back, and then I saw my family, and then 10 minutes. Okay, and I'm waiting. Okay, what's the question? And then in the end, Sayyid, is gelatin halal or haram? Just ask, Sayyid, is gelatin. Why did you give me all that unnecessary information? You know why? Sometimes it's because we love hearing ourselves talk. Because we don't have that pause button. We don't have that self-awareness. Put yourself in that person's shoes and you'll see how that person is being tortured. Because you are giving them unnecessary information. And sometimes when I tell them, please get to the point, they think I'm being arrogant or I'm being disrespectful. I'm not being disrespectful. This is all information that has nothing to do with your question. Sometimes I provide marriage counseling. One of the services that we provide in the Islamic center that I reside in the US is marriage counseling. husband and wife that are having problems, they come and we try to reconcile their differences. We try to offer that sulh. One of the problems, brothers and sisters, that I notice in almost every single session when they come is the waste of time. They give you unnecessary. I tell them, what's your problem with your wife? Wants to talk for 15 minutes. The appointment is 30 minutes. 15 minutes just to tell me that she, for example, doesn't respect me. So she doesn't respect me, and I'll give you two quick examples. They have to tell me they start when what? When they got married. They go all the way back to their marriage and how they... And when you tell them, get to the point, because your eyes is on the time, you have to be punctual, they think you're being rude. So we have to be more considerate of other people's time when we speak to them. Imam Ali says, yurithul malal. Don't be someone that is too talkative, because chances are you will be annoying. Unless you are Amir al-Mu'mineen and everything you say is like Nahjul Balagha, which chances are it's not, then try to limit your speech. And that's why the famous, this is a saying. It's a saying that we hear, but you can also find it in the hadith of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. إِذَا كَانَ الْكَلَامُ مِنْ فِضَّةٍ فَالسُّكُوتُ مِنْ ذَهَبٍ. If speech was from silver, then silence is gold. And this is truly a word that we have to ponder upon, brothers and sisters. Many of the greatest servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that made us to the highest levels of iman and taqwa, they did it just by practicing silence, by being silent, not talking too much. There's a hadith in Bihar al-Anwar, Alam al-Majlisi narrates that Prophet Adam, towards the end of his life, he was surrounded by one day his sons and daughters and his grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren. So they were all chatting and talking. You know how when you get together as a family, everyone's talking and chatting? Everyone was speaking instead of Adam, silent, or maybe he was just doing tasbih. So one of his sons asked him, why is it that I see you quiet? Yalla, speak, say something. So Adam said this important word. He said, after I was brought down to the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me, oh Adam, if you want to go back to your position, that high position that you had when I created you, he was the Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, correct? If you want to retain that high position that you had in paradise, then I tell you, Allah is telling Adam, how? فَأُوصِيكَ بِقِلَّةِ الْكَلَامِ بِالسُّكُوتِ. Then do not speak too much. Practice silence and you will attain that position once again. And this is something very important, brothers and sisters, that we teach ourselves how to be silent. Now, this is something that is easier said than done. Because sometimes, when you tell yourself, Yalla, I'm not going to talk, it's hard. You have an urge to always blurt out, to say something. So it's not easy. So how does someone implement this tactic? Remember, wearing the mask so that I don't spread the sins, so that I don't spread that virus. Now there's a couple of ways. But sometimes, you really have to put a physical mask on your mouth in order to control it. Let me give you an example. There's a hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, Alam al-Majlisi narrates in Bihar al-Anwar, where the Imam says this about the companions of Rasulullah. Listen. He says, وَكَانَ بَعْضُ أَصْحَابِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وآله يضع حصاة في فمه. The Imam says, according to this hadith, some of the companions of Rasulullah would take a stone and they would place it in their mouth, such that their mouth is full. Why? Why would someone do that? The Imam says, فَإِذَا أَرَادَ أَنْ يَتَكَلَّمْ بِمَا عَلِمَ أَنَّهُ لِلَّهِ وَفِي اللَّهِ وَلِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ أَخْرَجَهُ. This is like a type of muzzle, so that you don't speak unless it's necessary. If there's a rock in your mouth, you're not going to talk a lot because it's annoying to keep on taking it out and putting it back in. So they would only speak if they thought that this is for Allah Azza wa Jal, this will please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how they taught themselves, they disciplined themselves to control the tongue. Because like I said, this tongue sometimes is a beast, has to be tamed. How do you tame it? Even if it means this. And this has also been attributed to one of our ulama. One of our ulama, Sayyid Ali al-Qadhi, rahmatullah alayh, one of the urafa of the last century. They say that when he was young, and he was trying to seek nearness to Allah, and he was starting on his spiritual journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is exactly what he did. He says, I would take a rock and I'd put it in my mouth the whole day unless necessary. That's why I would rarely talk. Until when he grew older, he developed a lisp. Ladgha. He could not pronounce some of the letters. Why? Because that stone eventually left a mark, a bruise on his tongue, but it was worth it for him. It was worth it that his tongue becomes bruised as long as he can control this tongue, because the Prophet says, أَكْثَرْ خَطَايَا بْنِ آدَمْ مِنْ لِسَانِهِ. If you want salvation, then control this tongue. And there's a hadith, likewise, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, one of the companions of Rasulullah, he asked him, Ya Rasulullah, teach me how to go to paradise and stay away from the fires of hell. The Prophet says, do you want a long answer or a short answer? We always love short answers, right? Long answers are difficult. Do 500 things and you go to paradise, you won't go to hell. The Prophet told him, I'll tell you one thing. The Prophet pointed towards his mouth and he said, control this. Control your tongue. For if you control your tongue, you will go to paradise. And Allah will protect you from the fires of hell. Isn't it worth it that I take some even sometimes extreme measures? Now, you don't have to put a rock in your mouth. You may seem this as too extreme. Don't put a rock in your mouth. Put a strawberry in your mouth. Right? And it could be a chocolate covered strawberry, but not when you're fasting, by the way. Do it at night. Put that chocolate covered strawberry in your mouth so that you don't speak unless it's necessary. When it's necessary, when it's something good, something positive, something that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, take out the strawberry, answer it, put it back in. So be creative. So this is one way that we can teach ourselves to speak less. Put that spiritual mask, and sometimes that spiritual mask could be physical, on your mouth. So this is the second way that we can protect ourselves, the external way that we could protect ourselves from spiritual vices, spiritual diseases, viruses, and sins. And then if you remember last night we said, and then there's another way, another method of protecting ourselves from a virus, from a physical virus, like from COVID or the flu or anything of that nature. We said that relies on what? On your internal strength, not external. Mask, social distancing, wash your hands. These are all external measures that what? That prevent the virus from infecting you. The second method we said is when you strengthen your internal immunity, such that even if you breathe that virus, it will still not affect you. It will still not kill you. And that we said physically, we said what? If your immune system, you have to boost it through healthy foods, vitamin D, vitamin C, exercise, don't smoke. These are all factors that will make your immune system stronger. And then we said the vaccine, correct? The vaccine, the point is that it gives you that internal protection so that you can easily fight that virus inside versus just run away from it. Likewise, we said when it comes to taqwa, the true taqwa, the powerful taqwa, the highest level of taqwa, the most valuable taqwa is the one that relies on internal methods. It's not just always running away from, that's good. Social distancing, put the mask, correct? Don't go next to the haram. But we said last night, sometimes the haram will come to you. What do you do there? If you don't have that spiritual immunity inside you, you will commit the haram. The dunya will tempt you and you will go after the dunya. And that's why I mentioned there were some people throughout history that they were pious. But why were they pious? Because they lived a simple life. But once the dunya came to them, as that Khalifa they narrate, there was one of the Khulafa, before he became the Khalifa, they say he was at the masjid the whole day, reading Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal, dua, ibadah. The whole day he was a abid. Until one day, the Khalifa before him died, and He had no successor, so he wasn't the first line. He was maybe third, fourth line, but somehow all of them died, or they were all somehow removed, and power reached him. So all of a sudden they come to him. He's reading the Quran. He's opening the Quran. He's reciting. They come to him and they tell him, "Oh Fulan, what is it? You have become the Khalifa." How? The Khalifa died, his successor died, and now it's your turn. You know what that person did? He said he closed the Quran and he said, "Hada firaqum bayni wa baynak." He said, "Goodbye, O Quran, I will never see you again." Was this person someone that had taqwa? Well, if you look at the first half of his life, it's all Quran, ibadah. But what's the problem? He didn't have that internal immunity, fear of Allah Azza wa Jal, belief in Allah, that high iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why when the world came to him, he chased it. He accepted it. Because he has no immunity. Obviously. There was a distance between him and the dunya. Because he could never even get it. But now that he got it, he went into the haram. So that's why we said the second way, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, this is the true taqwa. عند حضور الشهوات واللذات يتبين وراء الأتقياء. This is when you know this individual is a pious person. You know, there are people in the community who tell me, Sayyid, there are people we see in the masjid, we used to think they were mu'mins, believers, always in the first line praying. But they come and they ask us for a loan. We lend them, we never see them again. Was that person pretending? Was it all a show? Sometimes, but sometimes no. Really, this person is worshipping Allah Azza wa Jalla. Why? Because he was never tested. Now he has 10,000 dinars. Now what? There's no immunity. The shaitan can easily come and sway this individual. And that's why you find, brothers and sisters, that as we mentioned last night, one of the best ways to build that self-immunity from the temptations of the dunya, from the shaitan, from the haram, is fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. Like Yusuf we mentioned. He was in the room all alone, we said last night. And she told him, "Why are you afraid of? No one will know." What did he say? He pointed towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ma'ad Allah. Allah is watching me. This is the inner protection that always protects you from haram. That gives you immunity all the time. That fear that you have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now someone will say, why should I fear Allah? You know, this is a misconception that's raised sometimes. Isn't Allah merciful? So why should I fear Him? We don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala oppressing us. Allah is adil, just. You know why we fear Him? We fear His justice. Sometimes when you're speeding, right? You see a police, you hear a siren, right away you're afraid. Why? Is that police going to oppress you? No, because you know you're breaking the law. When you are breaking the law, you fear justice. When we know we always sin and Allah is just, we fear Allah Azza wa Jal. We fear His reckoning. We fear the day of judgment. We fear the grave because Allah will ask us. So we do fear Allah, but it's a positive fear because we fear His justice. If He wasn't just, I wouldn't fear Him. Because maybe Allah Azza wa Jal, you know, I could bribe Him somehow. And He will let me go. But we know Allah is just. A just person is to be feared. If you are someone that is not going on the right path. Look at Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. One of the most beautiful examples that he leaves us, I'll mention this and then we will end. One of the most beautiful examples of taqwa that you will ever hear and read in your life is the story of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. He shows you his true taqwa and piety. He says in Nahj al-Balagha, it's a beautiful sermon. He says, "Wallahi la'an abita ala hasak al-sa'dani musahhada aw ujarra fil aswaqi musaffada." He says, "Wallahi, if I were given the option to either, number one, they tell me that you have to lay down and sleep on sa'dan." Sa'dan is a plant that's filled with sharp thorns. Imagine, there's all these thorns, like knives. They tell me sleep on it. He says, I would choose this. Even though it's so painful, it's torture, I would still choose it over what? We'll mention. Or, he says, I would choose ujarra fil aswaqi musaffada. If they would tie me, let's say, you know, to a horse, and then that horse would just drag me in this market in front of everybody. This has two types of pain. Number one, physical, you're being dragged. Number two, it's a form of humiliation. Everybody will look at you. You're being dragged like that. The Imam says, yeah, I would choose that over what? He says, I would choose these two over what? He says, والله لأن أبيت على حسك السعدان مسهدا أو أجر في الأسواق مصفدا أحب إلي من أن ألقى الله ورسوله يوم القيامة وأنا ظالم لأحد من العباد أو غاصب لشيء من الحطام. He says, I would prefer that than to meet Allah on the day of judgment while I have oppressed another being, while I have stolen something from the ruins of the dunya. I would never do that. And then he says, he mentions why. He says, وَكَيْفَ أَظْلِمُ أَحَدًا لِنَفْسٍ يُسْرِعُ إِلَى الْبِلَى قُفُولُهَا وَيَطُولُ فِي الثَّرَى مُكُوثُهَا or حُلُولُهَا. He says, how can I oppress someone in the dunya when I'm being watched all the time and I will lay in a grave in a couple of days? And Allah will hold me accountable in that grave. How? Some people, they don't think about it. That everything I do is being recorded. Why? Why would you do it when it's being recorded? It's like someone that goes in front of the police station, in front of the makhfar, and he starts smoking drugs, taking drugs. Why in front of the police station? This is how we are. The Imam says, if I know I'm going to sleep in my grave and everyone will die. This is the most obvious truth of our lives, that we will die and we will be placed in our graves. And the hadith of the Prophet or Imam Ali says, إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمْ قَامَتْ قِيَامَتُهُ. When we die, our judgment day starts, our minor judgment day in our graves. So Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam says, I will never oppress anyone. I will never steal anything. Why? Because I'm going to die. I'm going to be placed in my grave and I'll be held accountable by Allah. This is one way to build that inner taqwa. Even if nobody's looking, even if nobody knows I can steal something. أَلَمْ يَعْلَمْ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ يَرَى. Allah Azza wa Jal saw me. So this is one way that we can build that inner immunity. And there was a story I wanted to mention and end with it, and that's the story of Aqil. But I'm out of time. I'll quickly summarize it in 1 or 2 minutes. And then Imam Ali alayhi salam, he mentions after that, he mentions the story of his brother Aqil, his older brother, when the Imam became the Khalifa, the Muslim treasury, Bayt al-Mal, he could do whatever he wanted with it, but he's the Khalifa, the king. So his brother Aqil, he says, Wallah, لَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ عَقِيلًا وَقَدْ أَمْلَقْ حَتَّى اسْتَمَاحَنِي مِنْ بُرِّكُمْ صَاعَةً. My brother Aqil was in need. He came to me, he told me, you're my brother, you're the Khalifa, give me some what? Some burs, give me some wheat. It's not even gold, not even money, some wheat. Sa', 3 kilograms. Yani even haram. Aqil wasn't asking for much. But this is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Whether it's 1 grain or whether it's 1,000 kilograms of gold. Imam Ali alayhi salam has principles. وَعَاوَدَنِي مُؤَكَّدًا وَكَرَّرَ عَلَيَّ الْقَوْلَ مُرَدَّدًا. He kept on telling me, yeah, Ali, nobody will know. You're the Khalifa, it's just 3 kilograms. And even though Aqil was in need, but it seems like he had already gotten his share from the Baytul Mal, but he wanted more. The Imam says, فَظَنَّ أَنَّهُ أَبِيعَهُ دِينِي وَأَتَّبِعَ طَرِيقَهُ وَأَتَّبِعَ قِيَادَهُ مُفَارِقًا طَرِيقِهِ. He thought that I would sell my religion. Allahu Akbar. Imam Ali considers a bag of 3 kilograms of wheat, maybe today's standards, what, $3, $4, $5? If I give this from the Bayt al-Mal to someone that has already taken from Bayt al-Mal, then this is, I'm selling my religion. So the Imam then says, I told him wait. Aqil was happy now. Aqil, it is said, was blind, so he couldn't see. So the Imam said, okay, I'll bring you. The Imam, he says, فَأَحْمَيْتُ لَهُ حَدِيدًا. He says, I took a metal rod, I put it on fire until it was very hot, then I brought it close to his skin. He can't see. He says, فَأَدْنَيْتُهَا مِنْ فَضَجَّ ضَجِيجَ ذِي أَلَمٍ مِنْ فَضَجَّ ضَجِيجَ ذِي دَنَسٍ ذِي أَلَمٍ مِنْ أَلَمِهَا وَكَادَ أَنْ يَحْتَرِقَ مِنْ مِيسَمِهَا. He says he started to shout. He said, ouch, Ya Ali, what are you doing? I told him, Ya Aqil, what are you doing? ثَكَلَتْكَ الثَّوَاكِلُ يَا عَقِيل أَتَئِنُّ مِنْ نَارٍ أَحْمَاهَا إِنسَانُهَا لِلَعِبِهِ. You are afraid of this metal rod that I, a human being, has heated, I, a weak human being. وَتَجُرَّنِي إِلَى نَارٍ سَجَرَهَا جَبَّارُهَا لِغَضَبِهِ. And you are dragging me towards the fires of hell of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Never. Never will I disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't care how small the sin is, how insignificant the amount is. This was Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is taqwa at its height, where you can never negotiate with that individual. No matter what, Imam Ali alayhi salam preserved this faith. No matter what, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he was always thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is taqwa, brothers and sisters. When you can always focus on Allah azza wa jal, even if you are surrounded by the dunya. And that's why Imam Ali lost many friends because of this. Because sometimes your friends want you to what? Your friends want you to overlook the law. They want you to bypass some of the muharramat. You're my friend, do this, do that. If you want to tell them no, 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 they're going to leave you. And many people left Imam Ali alayhi salam because of his firm stand for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Insha'Allah, tomorrow night we will continue the series on taqwa, the different types of taqwa, and how we can attain taqwa. So tonight we spoke about fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we gave the example of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Tomorrow we'll speak more about the sources of taqwa and how we can develop this taqwa so that we can follow in the footsteps of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam.